My name is Tom Pankratz. I'm a former director of the IDA and the editor of the Water Desalination Report. The IDA is a technical trade organization with a goal of encouraging research, development, and the appropriate utilization of desalination and water reuse technologies. Today's IDA represents the coming together of two organizations in the 1980s, the International Desalination and Environmental Association and the National Water Supply and Improvement Association. Today we're in San Diego at the IDA's biannual World Congress, where we're going to be interviewing some desal industry veterans. This is part of a program funded by Faith Leitner in honor of her late father, Gordon Leitner, an industry veteran and a mentor to many of us. Gordon was a former IDA president and the founding editor of the organization's Desal and Water Reuse Quarterly. And with me today are Bob Bailie and Sharif Disi. And we're going to start by finding out a little bit about your background. Bob, if you could start and tell us, how did you get into desal? Where did you go to school? What brought you into the industry?
Well, I got started straight out of college at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And from there it was Maxim Evaporator Division of AMF. And I was right away getting into seawater desalination in June of 1961. At Maxim, I was working on projects that were all small evaporators. The largest evaporator was a 50,000 gallon per day for a subtender.
Is this the Maxim that's in
Maxim,
New Orleans?
Is it Maxim? Yeah, it's Maxim's now in Shreveport.
And where were they at the time?
This was in Connecticut.
Okay.
It was Waterford, Connecticut, outside of New London. We did a lot of work there for nuclear subs. I had my original the engineering manager originally was Paul Tomlin, and Paul Tomlin is long gone now, but Paul was U.S. Coast Guard, and then later after Maxim he was OSW. So, and Paul Tomlin said, if you're really lucky in life, you're going to have a year when you're going to get 10 years experience, as opposed to 1 year's experience repeated for 10 years. And under Paul was Don Hornberg. And Don Hornberg was my boss, and I learned an awful lot from Don Hornberg, had a great respect for him, and there were a few other people that to carry on. I ended up being the one who went to see where the pros are. We used to get together for lunch and say, fellows would get the little sandwich shop near Maxim, and the question was, where are the pros in this business? I had an opportunity to interview for a job with GE when I saw a Time ad in, well, it might have been Herald Tribune, New York Times. It was one of the two way back then. And even if you don't enjoy skiing the slopes of Stowe or sailing Lake Champlain, you'll enjoy living and working in Burlington, Vermont. So I took an interview with GE, and I had an offer from GE. But GE, at that time, it was vertical tube, and shipboard vertical tube didn't sound to me like a good idea because I was all very familiar with rock and roll requirements by the Navy. And when I came back from that, I thought I would be going from the frying pan into the fire. When I came back from that interview, that little meeting at the sandwich shop, where are the pros? I took an interview with Westinghouse. And I was interviewed by Roy Gaunt, who ran the Water Province Department, which was the desal group at Westinghouse. And as a matter of fact, Roy Gaunt is alive and fairly well at age 91, about an hour and a half up the road. And I've stayed in touch. Anyway, I went to Westinghouse, and I was a negotiation engineer originally. And then we ended up competing for the project in Key West, the Key West desalting plant. And that project was kind of like a high point of my desalination career. It had to be, because all of a sudden...
And what year was that?
This was the negotiations and all the work as a negotiation engineer were in, that'd be 66.
Okay.
And that was around the time I first met Dick Smith, who I know. You know all about Dick Smith.
The founder of the
The
Water
founder
Desalination
of Water
Report.
Desalination Report. And then it got kind of hectic. We were in competition with Aquachem.
Well, let me stop you right there for a second, because we've got an Aquachem guy sitting right next to you. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to hear a little bit about Sharif's background.
Catching up to Key West.
Catching up to about Key West, and let's pick it up from there.
Okay, yeah. I went to school at Marquette, in Marquette University in Milwaukee. And during my junior year and senior year, I worked part-time for Alice Chalmers in West Allis. And when I graduated, they took me on as a permanent employee. And I was working in the special pumps division, which at the time was designing and building the pumps for the California Aqueduct, which brings the water from Northern California all the way down here to Orange County. And these were huge pumps. Alice Chalmers had, I think, 40 stations, Tehachapi, Wind Gap, and Buena Vista. I think there were 2 Wind Gap. And BLH, Bolton, Lima, Hamilton, got the rest of the...
And we'll hear that name later, won't we?
Yeah, so
BLH.
These pumps were huge, from 315 cubic feet per second to 460 cubic feet per second, like 200,000 gallons a minute or so. And myself and one other kid were the youngest people who had any knowledge of computers. And these were the computers where you had the punch cards and you fill in a drawer and was Gotran. And my job was to work on the actual prototype testing as well as do the analysis on the computer, including the finite element methods, to do the calculations to satisfy the state of California requirements. So one day I get a phone call, and the guy then at the other end of the line said, "I am Dick Gildner with Aquachem." I had never heard the name, although they were just 20 miles away from Milwaukee or something like that. And he explained, what they do, desalting, and he was vice president of engineering and R&D. And he asked me, he said, "We're interested in talking to you about a job in R&D." And asked me if I could go and see them that week, during the week. And I said I couldn't, because we had a full load of testing to do at Alice Chalmers. He said, "Can you make it on Saturday?" I said, "Yes, I can." So I went on Saturday, and there was Dick Gilner and Gordon Leitner. And Gordon had just taken over as president of Aquachem, because while I was there, by coincidence, Fred Label, who was the Aquachem president before Gordon, walked in. He had not fully cleaned up his office. He came to pick up some stuff in his office, and I met him. And that's when I found out how Aquachem called me. It turned out that Fred Label played golf with my boss, Alice Chalmers. Alice Chalmers were going to move the pump division to York, Pennsylvania, and I declined to move with them because I was doing some work at Marquette, some graduate work, and I had an opportunity to work in a different division, in the fuel cell division at Alice Chalmers, and also I had been in contact with Alan Bradley, and so I did not want to leave Milwaukee. So my boss apparently told Fred Label that they should talk to me, and that's how Dick Gellner called me. At the meeting, I said, "What do you want me to do?" And they said, "Well, we're working on a tubular diaphragm pump for reverse osmosis, and we would like you to do the R&D work." And I said, "Okay, what does it involve?" And I said, "Well, the standard piston pumps, the pistons do not last, and they get galled, and the seals leak, and we want to design a tubular diaphragm so that the seawater never gets in contact with the mechanical end, and we'd use glycerin on the inside of the diaphragm, and we think that's the solution to the problem." I told them I had a solution that they don't need me for, and that's all they had to do is contact so-and-so at Union Carbide, because during my work at Alice Chalmers, I had a side project to work on a sealing for high-pressure pumps at the Wisconsin Dairyland power plant. It was a nuclear power plant. It was La Crosse, I think.
So you were able to solve their problem during the interview or tell them how
So I
to do
told
it?
them, "Don't need me for that." They said, "Well, no, we need to continue with it, and also we need to develop, we are starting to work on a centrifugal compressor for the vapor compression desalination systems." Up to that date, they had been using the positive displacement lobe type, like the MD, the suture belts, and they wanted to switch to centrifugal, mainly because Miko had already switched to centrifugal. So I said, "I'll think about it," and they said, "Okay." And I went back, and I thought I'd have a week to 2 weeks. Well, 2 working days later, like a Tuesday or a Wednesday of the following week, the Gellner called me back and said, we really need an answer. We would like to go on with this, fill in the position." So I thought about it, and the fact that on a Saturday there was the vice president and the president interview me, it somehow had an impact. Although, for all I know, they could have been going there anyway, not just for me. So I said, "Okay," and that's how I joined Aquachem, and I was in the R&D department. The pump project went on, but I did coat the pistons, and they did better than the diaphragm. But then I really got involved with the development of the centrifugal compressor, and that was most of the work I did. Then I became manager of engineering and got into sales and application engineering.
So Gordon's first official act as president of the company was to hire you.
One of his, because like I said, he must have been president for a few days.
And remind us of the year this was?
That would have been 69.
Okay.
Yeah, I
69.
think it was 69. Yeah.
Now, bring us up to this Key West project.
The Key West project, the negotiation end of it was in 66.
Okay.
The actual building the plant was 67. And let me just get caught up to that.
That's fine. Sorry.
What happened, I ended up, I was on a trip. I was doing some work with the Virgin Island Water and Power Authority. I was down in one of Westinghouse's plants down there. And I got a call from Roy Gaunt, the same man who hired me, who was the #1 guy with the Water Province Department. And he told me that I had been so much involved in the negotiation and everything on that end of it, I was made supervisory project engineer for the Key West project. So I was called, that was a quick flight out of the Virgin Islands back to Philadelphia. And what happened, we were putting together a team of people, and in the middle of putting together the team of people, one I had these good friends back with that sandwich shop in Connecticut. One of the names that I think few people will know, who I've been a friend for life now, Dave Gagne, real sharp engineer. I recruited him to come to work with the team at Westinghouse. Dave Gagne had a fellow who was there after I had left Maxim. I had been at Westinghouse for a while, a fellow by the name of Butch Morin, O.J. Morin. And then
Butch. They called him Butch.
Butch Morin. O.J. was O.J. sometimes Butch. And then another fellow who, Andy Lesperance. And let's see, and then the fifth of the bunch was a Fran Faulkner. Now, Fran Faulkner, unfortunately, died a couple of years ago, Alzheimer's. But the rest of us keep in touch. Well, not O.J. as much. He's hard to keep in touch with sometimes. You know about that.
Yeah, everybody knows about
Everybody
that.
knows about that.
He's always around, but
Yeah.
not always easy to get.
But in any event, what happened, I had this team. Of course, nowadays, it'd be great to recruit 4 guys to come work with you. Nice bonuses involved nowadays. But at that time, we put together a good team, and we ended up, Westinghouse had a fellow who was going to be a project manager, and some of their, way back in the 60s, their background checking said, better not hire him. So I ended up functioning as a project manager. And my boss, Ben Scarborough, who had been one of the key guys at Westinghouse for years, and above him was Roy Gaunt. But we had this team, and everything went together, and suddenly it was time to start the plant up. And this was in April of '67. The plant got started, and I was like the startup engineer then.
And remind us of the capacity of the
Oh,
plant.
yeah.
And
The plant at that time, it was the largest single unit desalting plant, desalination plant in the world. And that lasted for 1 year.
and the process that it
Multi-stage flash. It was a 50-stage multi-stage flash plant. I will say it was 2 stages of reject, 48 stages of recovery, and 1 stage where I had gotten a patent. Fluor, and we'll get into that a little later, Fluor, the engineers, had done some things, and I think Sharif can understand, computer-wise, when we're optimizing a plant, they wanted the bottom temperature to be like 90 degrees or lower. Westinghouse optimizing, no, it could be higher. So I came up with the idea of adding an additional stage of flash distillate. So we flashed distillate down further, and it was our distillate cooler. They even had in the specs you couldn't have a shell and tube distillate cooler. So we had I had a patent on it, and that's the way it was. Now this evaporator was all field fabricated from scratch. Visualize a box, 105 foot long tubes, 105 foot long. The box was 70 feet wide, 8 feet tall, all fabricated in the field and sitting on flex plates, 4 foot, a little more than 4 foot high flex plates. And that plant was one of the things Westinghouse a long time back got into the desalting as opposed to desalination. Funny little story. We had I think it was some air ejector spare parts that arrived, during operation of the plant. This was, I'm getting ahead. This is when I was operating as the plant superintendent, plant manager rather. This box arrived for the desalvation plant.
desalvation.
Desalvation. And the desalvation plant, we said, it's desalting. Desalting we can remember. So it ended up with a real good crew of operators. I ended up from startup engineer, I went to plant manager, operating the plant on a contract we had with the Florida Keys Aqueduct commission or authority, depending on what year it was. And we operated the plant for a year. It was challenging because one of the problems we had way back, they had a whole lot of crashing surf and mud, and they had my operating superintendent, Les Chilcott, had worked on operating that Point Loma plant. And they had the Point Loma Pit Muckers Society, which were the operators that went in and shoveled out the sand. The seawater intake was a real problem with the surf and the sand and so forth. Well, what happened, Fluor decided to go with seawater wells on Stock Island. They learned that City Electric system had wells for City Electric, but the geology was different at City Electric than on the fill land out on Stock Island, which is adjacent to Key West. And all pumping of the seawater wells at City Electric, the hydrogen sulfide went down within a matter of 3 months or so. At Key West, the hydrogen sulfide never went down. In fact, after I left, it even got worse. It started out about 5 parts per million, and hydrogen sulfide and copper nickel tubing don't get along very well. After I left Westinghouse, I learned that I shouldn't have been up on top of the decarbonator too much, because that hydrogen sulfide coming up, you could die from that stuff. But in any event, we had a good operation. One of the things that happened is I got to the point where people would be visiting the plant. Westinghouse was publicizing. We had a dedication of the plant, official dedication. Vice President Hubert Humphrey was there. The first thing he wanted to do was meet the plant manager. You know, real thrill. All of a sudden, we're big news, but it was a whole lot of fun. Dedication day, I'll always remember. 2 years before the moon landing, July 20th, 1967. And that was quite a day. Later, as we were operating, we had these times where all of a sudden there'd be somebody showing up to want a tour of the plant. Depending on what kind of a day we had, it was, do I give them the big tour all the way around the plant, brine heater, the whole thing, or do I just go through the pump row, you know, tell them a little bit. I had a fellow come in. First of all, there was one time when an engineer, electrical engineer from Fort Lauderdale came down. His name was Chuck Bailie, with an EY. Westinghouse, we got to get a little PR out of this. I had my son, 9 years old at the time, 56 now. My son was there, sort of helping with the tour with Chuck Bailie from Fort Lauderdale. Chuck Bailie was connected to a firm in Fort Lauderdale, Philpott, Ross, and Saarinen. Art Saarinen and I got pretty well acquainted, and it ended up where a gentleman showed up, one of these tour things. His name, I will never forget his name, Edward M. Green. He was from Grand Bahama. He was in real estate. He was developing some property, and he needed desalination. It happened to be one of the days when we had a real problem that went back to the engineers, the specs originally, Fluor. I was not in a good mood. When we're leaving, I gave him the short tour. When we're leaving, I said, if I had a little money and a little guts, I'd probably form a consulting company of my own, because the real brains in this business are with the manufacturers. The Aquachems, the Bowen Lima Hamilton. We were the people who really knew the details of these things. A week later, I got a letter from this guy, letterhead and everything else. And what if I had the money? And I ended up staying up till 4 a.m. writing a prospectus. And at one time, I can vividly remember Les Chilcott and one or two of the operators and I, we went to lunch one day. We're on our way to Lum's. I don't know if you all remember Lum's, but Lum's, the hot dogs and beer. And Les asked me, what are you going to call this company? The fact, I shouldn't say it with the conference here, but desalination, having remembered desalvation, desalting systems and services. Les said, that sounds good. That became the name of the company. And at the time, I had about a half a dozen people that I wanted to partner into the company. What happened?
Well, the significance of that name, the acronym DSS, correct?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
That's what I'll get.
Okay,
Further,
I'm getting ahead of you.
You're
Okay.
getting ahead of me. Further down the road, what happened was I had about a half a dozen or more people that were going to be on this team. I made a presentation here at I think it was the same hotel where Bobby Kennedy was shot. And at the time, I remember going to an evening thing, and all of a sudden, Gordon Leitner and Everett Cedar, OSW, were in a back room negotiating because of the flash test module that they had, again, one of their demonstration plants down in this neighborhood, San Diego area. And that, Don Hornberg was there. The earth started to shake when those guys were in the room negotiating. There was an earthquake when Gordon Leitner and Everett Cedar were arguing about something to do with the flash test module. Don Hornberg and I said to Don, told him about the company. He was top on my list. We drove from LA down here, and I spent the hour or so drive talking Don Hornberg into being a partner in the company. And that's how it all started. We were 50-50 partners, and that was the beginning of what later became DSS.
So with that, I'd like to move to Sharif and ask you a little bit about the time at Aquachem, and then your eventual leaving Aquachem to MECO. I'd like to hear how that happened.
Well, at Aquachem, again, I got heavily involved with the vapor compression systems, especially the switching from positive displacement compressors to centrifugal. Also, someone had the idea that we can use aluminum tubes in the spray film vapor compression systems.
At
Aquachem, I think someone
actually considered
someone
aluminum
from Alcoa convinced somebody at Aquachem, no names mentioned, to buy aluminum tubes. And it was a matter of days before we found out that the tubes became perforated with a whole bunch of holes because of the direct spray from the spray nozzles. And we had to switch back to 90-10 copper nickel, and with the top 3 rows being titanium, because only the top 3 rows are subject to the direct spray from the nozzles. Below that, the water is just cascading. The other development was, as I mentioned, switching from the lobe type positive displacement, extremely noisy compressors to a centrifugal compressor. And when I joined Aquachem, they had the very first prototype, and it was made all out of aluminum. Aluminum housing, aluminum impeller, the whole thing. And they had ball bearings. And it seemed that they tried to kind of match MECO, because MECO had already designed and built a centrifugal compressor with ball bearings, and so Aquachem said, let's do the same. and they built it all out of aluminum except obviously for the shaft. And the experience was that it was a matter of maybe so many hours, 100 hours, 200 hours of operation, and the leading edge of the vanes of the impeller will become like the saw teeth because of the erosion. Aluminum is so soft. And they selected aluminum because of the lightweight, obviously. So when I joined them, they said, okay, you have the pump, diaphragm pump, which I mentioned, and we want you to take over the compressor development. So I told them I'd only do that if they give me free hand in making significant changes. And said, what do you want to do? I said, the aluminum impeller has to go, and there is no way that we are going to ever get that compressor to work reliably with aluminum housing and ball bearings, because once it got up to temperature, these are compressors that operate at about 14,000 RPM. So the bearings are precision type bearings called class 7 and with extremely tight tolerance. Well, with aluminum, it expands so much that once the compressor came up to temperature, you lost all the tolerance, and the bearing would fail in a matter of hours sometimes. So I said, I want to change all that. And he said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go to journal bearings, and I want to find a different material, and I would like to change the whole housing. They said, well, we paid so much money for the tooling, we would like to keep the housing aluminum at least. I said, okay, we'll try to anodize it then. And I started looking, and I found a foundry in Pomona, California, southeast of LA, called Titec. It was established by Carpenter Technology, and Titec management bought it and renamed Carpenter Technology to Titec, and they were starting to do titanium castings. And mainly for the military, for the missiles, they would do the fins, the directional fins, stationary parts, and they were attempting to also to make some pump impellers. But they had not yet produced any commercial product at that foundry since this, since they bought it. It was just recently bought. After meeting with them, they said, yes, they can cast it, but it's going to be an experimental situation. And so the impeller was about 18 inches in diameter. It was enclosed impeller. And there were no standards for the inspection of titanium castings at that time and for many years after that. Titanium doesn't flow very well, so we had lots of surface problems and discrepancies. Eventually, we were able to agree on an inspection procedure, and I would fly every other week and inspect a whole bunch of castings, inspect the x-rays. I would spend I'd fly on Thursday night and spend Friday and Saturday reading x-rays. And I say, okay, this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. And that's how we got some impellers. And because of the lack of confidence in the quality, I decided that we need to explode some of these impellers, destroy them. And I found a couple places. One was Alcoa Aluminum, and they had a test pit. So I took one of the impellers and we ran it over speed and until destruction. And when that thing goes, it has so much energy. Actually, one chunk went through a 4-inch thick aluminum tank, which was the containment vessel. And that's how we get the aluminum impeller. So we had, and that was for 300 gallon per hour unit. Well, shortly after, Wilbur Gandy, who was supposed to be with us today, couldn't make it because he got sick. He had just moved into sales, working for Charlie Rose and Gordon Leitner. And Will, I can say, is the ultimate salesman. He sold 2 600-gallon per hour vapor compression units for Canton Island, which is in the Pacific, about halfway between Honolulu and Sydney, Australia, where there was a Navy base with a whole bunch of radars to track the missile testing, and that's where the Apollo 16, I think, was landed, and they helped retrieve it. And so they needed water. Canton Island is a very small island and has no water. And he sold them 2 units, 600 gallon per hour unit. Except Aqua Chem, we did not have a 600 gallon per hour centrifugal compressor. We had no design, we had no tooling, not whatsoever. And they had an evaporator which used tandem 2 MD, the positive displacement compressors in tandem, but he sold a centrifugal, which we did not have, and was short delivery. We had no time to do detailed drawings where you draw the compressor, detail it, and do the calculations, and then take these drawings and size the bearings and make bearings and all that. So we had no time to do that, and we had the commitment to deliver on time. And the way we did it, I did some calcs in the bearings. I went to a journal bearing company called Orion, just north of Milwaukee. They did journal bearings. And the 300 gallon per hour unit, which we had already converted, and I made a journal bearing, had a sleeve bearing. And sleeve bearings, you have a hit and miss. You can do all the calculations, all the design predictions you want, but there is always a fair chance that you may have to go back and tweak it a little bit, because the sleeve bearing, the pocket may not be in the right place, the oil flow may not be just right, and so you have to do some experimentation. And we had no time to do experimentation at 600. So I asked the bearing company to build what's called a tilting pad shoe bearing. It's like 4 shoes on a pivot, which are much more forgiving, and you're almost guaranteed they're going to work. They do not have the same issues like the plain sleeve. So anyway, we used the tilting pad, had Crane Seal use their R&D department to make us a special seal very quickly. And at the end of the day, we actually built the compressors in time, and everything fit, surprisingly. All the machine parts fit just the way it's supposed to be. And I remember we had him in a test bed, and the plant manager, his name was Marshall White, was standing next to the unit, and he said, when are you going to start this unit? Because he was used to the lobe type, which had 90 plus decibel noise level. And we had some shop noise a little bit, but, and he said, when are you going to start these units to see if they're going to run? I said, Marshall, the unit is running. You're leaning on it. He could not tell the unit was operating because he was used to 90 plus dB, and that thing was with a shoe bearing, was so quiet. And we made it on time, and a few days ago, Wilbur Gandy and I were reminiscing about the fact. He said, yeah, he didn't think that we could do it, but he still sold the units. And that was, we graduated from there, and we started building larger units. One of the more interesting projects, we had a customer who needed 100,000 gallons per day, but we only had compressors that would do 2,750 gallons an hour or so. So we needed, one compressor could not do the job on the same evaporator. So I decided we can use two compressors in parallel. And we went on with the design. And that was shortly after Gordon Leitner had left and Mandy Steinbrück became president of the company.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about when Gordon left, because it happened at a real turning point in Aquachem's history. So if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Coca-Cola bought Aquachem April or May of 1970.
Okay.
And Gordon, I think, left by the end of the year, or shortly after that.
And I understand that Mandy.
Well, Mandy, why did Coca-Cola buy Aquachem?
That's
What
a good,
happened
that's a good
is,
question. Yeah.
okay, Coca-Cola never owned, up to that point, a manufacturing facility. They just, they're bottling plants and food, and beverage. They had no manufacturing facilities that they owned. What happened, there was a conference somewhere here in San Diego. Mandy Steinbrück, who had come from Switzerland, joined Aquachem as chief engineer, and then was transferred to this area, lived actually in La Jolla, just north of here. He was the Western Region sales manager and technical consultant for Aquachem. And they were doing work with OSW. And so Mandy was here in the San Diego area and went to this conference and presented a paper on reverse osmosis. And you may recall, Aquachem had a reverse osmosis department, and they were dealing with the tubular type ROs, and they had 2+ dozen people working in the R&D department, RO, quite a few people. They had extrusion machines and the whole thing. Well, Mandy made a presentation on reverse osmosis and made it look like the future, which I guess he was right to some extent. There were Coca-Cola people present at that seminar. And the light sort of clicked with one of them, is that, hey, that's a solution for Coke, because Coke or Coca-Cola, they have the basic recipe for the syrup, and they tweak that depending on the location of the bottling plant, so that whether you're making Coca-Cola in the Philippines or in San Diego or wherever, the end product will always taste the same, although the water being used to prepare it may be different. So the fact that if you use RO, they thought, you are going to have consistently one quality water, therefore Coca-Cola will only have to make one syrup, which was a big deal. So they decided to buy Aquachem for that reason.
And one of the interesting outcomes of that was that they ended up on the boycott list.
Exactly, and that
and despite the fact that
100% killed the flash plant sales for Aquachem.
And despite the fact that Aquachem had some of the first and had the patent on the MSF, that Gordon Leitner.
Well, the brine recirculation, which was invented by Dick Gilner, which we'll come to.
Right.
Yeah.
But despite that, they could no longer do business in the most active
Yes.
market in the world.
Exactly.
And in fact, when I joined Aquachem, it was shortly after Coca-Cola sold them, and we were trying to get back into the Middle East after we were removed from the boycott list, and that's when I went to Dubai. So, this was almost 20 years later. I went just to help try to regain some of the market that they had lost.
That was the market for desalination plants, obviously, at the time, and Aquachem was completely cut off because of the boycott list, and they did very little during that time period in the multi-stage flash. That is.
And if you could just quickly to characterize or tell us what happened to you after, when you left, what caused you to go to MECO? And then I want to come back and learn a little bit more about DSS.
I left. I was moved from R&D. I spent 3 years in R&D at Aquachem, and after Coca-Cola bought the company, R&D did not have as much resources and influence in the company. Before that, R&D, anyone who rose to any position in Aquachem came from R&D. Because Cleaver,
From Cleaver Brooks.
he was an R&D nut in a way. That was his passion. And he had people in R&D. He had like a guy by the name John Horvath who could build anything from scratch with his hands. And he had Dick Gildner, and they had quite a few people that worked in R&D. Coca-Cola, when they bought Aquachem, after they bought Aquachem, R&D budget went down and all this, and I moved into engineering. I became the engineering manager for the package systems, and that's all the vapor compression and the reverse osmosis. Anything that was built, packaged, did not have to be put together on the site was called package systems. That included all seawater, offshore, the oil and gas, the resorts, the reverse osmosis, the pharmaceutical, where Aquachem was very heavily involved in the pharmaceutical industry. We're building the distillation units that produce the high purity water for injection, the injectables, the IV solutions.
Right.
That's the Baxters and the Abbotts and all that, all had Aquachem in this Merck, Sharp, and Dome, and so we were very heavily into that. So all these were package systems, and I became the engineering manager in application production engineering, and then and added to that, one day they came to me and they said, why don't you also be responsible for pharmaceutical sales, because people keep calling you as part of the application and you're handling it anyway, so why not take it over? So I took that over. Wilbur Gandy was the division or the group manager. In 77, he decided to go to MECO. And he came to my office and asked me if I would go down with him, and I said no. Because I did not think I could really work at MECO at that time. And I did not want to leave Milwaukee for other reasons too. And MECO had contacted me before, a few years before that, sent someone to recruit me, and did not work out. I decided not to join him. So Will moved down in 1977, and in a couple years later, the owner and his son, owner of MECO and his son, get killed in a plane crash, taking off the airport in New Orleans. Then the runway, the plane did not make it, and they were lost. John Pothorst and his son.
Second and third, I guess, or
third
and fourth.
John Pothorst Jr.
Yeah.
And John III, his son, and it was the situation was that it happened on a Monday. The week before, there was a trade show at the Hilton Hotel by Madison Square Garden for the pharmaceutical, for the PDA, Parental Drug Association, and I was there. Wilbur Gandy was there, John Pothorst Jr. and John III was were there. And I saw John III, and that was second time I saw him in about 2 weeks, because 2 weeks before that, they had an airplane. They had a Sabre line jet, And they sent it to Milwaukee and picked me and my wife and flew us to New Orleans just to talk to them. And John III knew I had hesitations working for his dad, made it clear to me that he was going to be running the company. And, and they
They
took
were
us.
two different people.
Two different people, exactly.
Very much so.
Very much so. And so anyway, they took us and dined us and all that, and flew us, with to New Orleans and back with the airplane. And I told him I'd think about it, but I still had hesitations working for John Jr.
So you did decide to join MECO.
Yes, but again, he contacted me again, and I decided. So I went down to MECO, like in December '79, started like 1980 effectively, and I have been with him ever since.
Well,
And different positions. I handled sales and marketing and application engineering. Then I ran engineering for about 9 years, R&D and engineering, and customer service. And I went back to sales and application engineering. So I changed hats a couple times during that period. Yes.
and let me get back and just as we conclude here and find out just if you could talk about the DSS we left off last. You were telling us about you'd got the
Yeah.
idea to form DSS. You started and
The company got started. It was we had a contract. I had a shake hands contract with Art Saarinen of Philpott Ross and Saarinen to do the engineering specs and so forth for the Blue Hills desalination plant on New Providence Island serving Nassau. That's the time I met John Waters, who was very active over there in the Bahamas. At that time, Don Hornberg was still with Foster Wheeler. There was a big cutback at Westinghouse. It all turned out that Don came. I worked on the specs in the summer of '68 after I left Westinghouse, and ended up with Don joining within a couple of months, and a little bit later OJ joined us. And we had to have 10% ownership, had to be professional engineers in Florida. Hornberg and I had not gotten our PE licenses yet, and Saarinen had 10%, Don and I had 45. So something that I conceived, I ended up with a 45% of a 50-50 arrangement. And later down the road, of course, we had worked with MECO. We did work with John Pothurst Jr., challenging things. And
That's what
I knew
everyone said.
Frank Zarambo, who had been with me way back at Maxim. Frank Zarambo was at MECO. Frank, long deceased. But then we ended up where I ended up going on my own, Robert Bailie and Associates. After I left, I had a falling out with Don Hornberg and on a particular project in Iceland that dealt with brine. And of course, I've been dealing with seawater and brine and freshwater, swimming it forever.
well, you've been in the industry and literally in the water
I
swimming.
have had, as of a couple of days from now when I turn 80, except from age 7 and below, I have had 73 years of playing and working with water.
Well,
All salinities, all the way up to the most recent brine concentrators I've worked on, where we went up to over 400,000 parts per million, 40% dissolved and suspended solids.
during this
And Orange County Water District. Work on Water Factory 21 when I was retained by Orange County Water District. Dealing with the city of LA at one point where they introduced me to Neil Klein. Neil Klein, I haven't seen him in years. I've stayed in touch with Gordon Elzer. I knew Dave Argo. A whole lot of names that I wish I could revisit.
Yeah.
But,
Well, I understand. It's hearing you bring up some of these names, and some I've met, and some I've heard about through my whole career has been very interesting. And in fact, as far as DSS, I really appreciate the hearing about how it started, because we're going to have a couple of DSS alumni that we're going to be talking to later today.
Sure.
So we're going to be.
Yeah.
They're
Bill
gonna,
Surratt didn't make it, correct?
No, he didn't.
Kurt Kiefer?
But Kurt Kiefer's going to be here. Ali Kalantar is going to be here. So
Okay.
we're going to be talking more about DSS. This was a good foundation. So in conclusion, you've spent 73 years in water. What anything you do differently, or just how can you sum it up in one breath?
It's been a lifetime with water. I think I might have been a dolphin on another planet in a previous life. I swim competition, and I'm still swimming competition.
And still desalting water.
And still working. Now I'm with heavier brines, oil field brines, and turning a nasty oil field brine. In one case, with a Canadian company I'm working with right now, it's going to be generating steam from nasty brines.
Well, Sharif, I know we were concerned that you wouldn't be able to make it because you're still traveling the world, going to Abu Dhabi, coming home for the weekend, headed off to Singapore. So,
well, I still do quite a bit of traveling, not as much as I used to before, but I'm responsible for both
for MECO.
seawater as well as pharmaceutical, which we do a lot of that. I want to change the subject just to acknowledge someone.
Okay.
And that is Richard Gilner.
Yeah.
I think he's probably the least acknowledged for the effort he made. I think he made significant efforts and contributions to the desal industry more than most people I know, and he does not really get as much credit because he was always a low-key guy. He passed away, unfortunately, back in 1991 from cancer. Jim Stewart, whom we all know, worked for him when he joined MECO. He joined as an assistant at Aquachem. He joined assistant to Dick Gilner, and both, by the way, ended up at MECO. But Dick, he patented the brine recirculation flash plant. He was behind the design of just about everything that Aquachem did.
I'd like to thank both of you for coming out here special to sit with us today, and it's been great to hear these stories and to hear the way some of these companies that and some of these people got their start in the industry as well as yourselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.